She said it so quietly, I thought I had misheard her. I had been in the middle of a sentence, something self-deprecating about my conversational skills. The kind of thing you say when you are trying to make a bad evening funny enough to survive. And she said it right into the gap, barely above a breath. Like a sentence that had been waiting behind her teeth for a while, and had finally found an exit while her guard was somewhere else. I stopped talking. She was looking at the television. She pulled the blanket up slightly, the way she did when she was cold, except it was not cold. And she did not look at me. I said, "What did you just say?" She said nothing, never mind. And that was the moment I understood that it was not nothing at all. My name is James Okafor. I am 32 years old. I work in project management for a mid-sized architecture firm. I am the person who makes sure the people with the vision also meet the deadline. Which means I spend most of my professional life as the designated adult in rooms full of people who are significantly more talented than me and significantly less interested in spreadsheets. I am good at reading a room. I am good at knowing what is actually being said underneath what is being said. I had been living with Priya for 14 months. She had found the apartment first, a 2-bedroom in a building old enough to have personality and new enough to have reliable hot water, which is the exact combination that makes a person sign a lease without thinking too hard about it. She had posted the room online with a list of requirements that was very specific and very honest. No pets, no overnight guests more than twice a week. Someone who could handle the fact that she worked from home and needed quiet before 10. I had responded because the price was right and the requirements seemed manageable, and I had been in 3 bad living situations in a row and wanted to stop. The interview had been thorough. She sat across from me at a coffee shop with a list of actual written questions and asked them in order. I thought this was either alarming or impressive and decided, correctly, that it was both. I passed. Apparently, she called me that evening. She said the room was mine if I wanted it. I said I wanted it. The living arrangement had been good from the start in the way that only works when 2 people are naturally compatible in their habits without having planned to be. She kept her side of the shared spaces clean and expected the same of mine. She made coffee in the mornings and always made enough for 2 without making a production of it. I handled the building maintenance requests because she found them draining and I found them straightforward, which is a division of labor that sounds minor and turns out to matter enormously. We had established, without discussing it, a rhythm. Who cooked on which nights, whose turn it was to replace the dish soap, when to leave each other alone, and when the other person needed someone in the room. She was a graphic designer who worked primarily for clients she referred to by their industry rather than their name. The tech client, the hospitality one, the difficult nonprofit. She did most of her work between 10 and 4, with focus I found quietly astonishing, and then she would emerge from her room around dinner time in whatever she wore when she was done working, which was usually softer than what she wore before. And she would occupy the couch with a cup of tea and the throw blanket that was technically communal and had become operationally hers. I had stopped thinking of it as my blanket about 6 months in. It had migrated to her side of the couch, along with a paperback she was always in the middle of, and a small ceramic bowl that held nothing but existed there anyway. I had noticed her the way you notice someone you live with, thoroughly, incrementally, in the accumulation of small details that build a picture without you meaning to sit for it. I knew that she laughed at things that were dry and missed things that were obvious. I knew she was more sentimental than she presented, and that she would deny this if you pointed it out. I knew she had opinions about the correct way to load a dishwasher that she had stated once and then never mentioned again, which I understood to mean she had made her peace with my dishwasher incompetence as a fixed feature of the arrangement rather than a correctable problem. I knew her voice when she was on a work call versus the version she used with her mother. I knew which nights she needed the apartment quiet and which nights she needed someone to eat dinner with, and I had gotten good at knowing the difference without asking. I had not, until the night of the failed date, done anything with any of this, but I had been collecting evidence without meaning to. The way you collect evidence about something you are not ready to name. There was a day in month 6 when she was in the middle of a difficult project, the difficult nonprofit, the one that changed its brief 3 times and had opinions about color theory, and she had come out of her room at 2 in the afternoon, looking like a person who had been in the same chair for 5 hours, which she had been. And I had made her a sandwich without asking, and put it on the counter and gone back to my work call. She had not said anything about it that day. That evening she had said, very simply, "Thank you for the sandwich." And I had said it was nothing, and she had said, "It wasn't nothing," in the tone she used when she was being precise. I had found something to look at across the room and moved on. There was a Saturday in month 9 when I had come home from a run to find her on the couch, with the quiet kind of crying that happens when a person is overtired and something small tips the balance. She had looked at me with the expression of someone who had not been planning to be seen, and I had not asked what was wrong. I had sat down in the armchair and put the television on something low and just been there, and after a while she had stopped, and we had watched whatever was on without talking about it. Later she had said, "Thank you for not making it a thing," and I had said it was fine, and she had said, "Not everyone knows how to do that." And I had understood she was telling me something, and had declined to fully receive it. There was the evening in month 11 when she had come home from her sister's to find me reading, and she had sat down without saying anything, and I had handed her the blanket without looking up from my book, because I knew she would want it, and she had gone still for just a beat before she took it, barely anything, and then settled in beside me, and we had spent the rest of the evening in the particular quiet of 2 people who are comfortable together, and I had thought, around 10 o'clock, that this was the best part of most days, and then had put that thought somewhere I did not examine it. I want to be fair to myself about the date. It had not been a disaster. Miriam was a colleague of a friend, recommended with enthusiasm, and the evening itself was perfectly fine. Dinner at a restaurant that was nicer than necessary, conversation that was easier than first dates usually are, no obvious disasters. She had texted me the following day to say she had enjoyed it but did not feel a connection, and she was sorry, and she hoped I had a good week. This was polite and clean, and exactly as deflating as being let down politely and cleanly always is. I came home at 10:15 to find Priya on the couch, in the configuration she was always in at that hour. Throw blanket. Tea. The soft version of herself that appeared after 4 o'clock. She looked up when I came in and read something in my face immediately, because she was good at reading faces, and she said, "What happened?" I told her. I sat in the armchair across from her and gave her the summary, the dinner, the polite text. The specific low-level indignity of being let down by someone who handled it exactly correctly, which somehow made it worse rather than better, because there was no one to be annoyed at. She listened the way she listened, which was fully, without interrupting or offering solutions until I was finished. Then she said that Miriam sounded like she had been honest, and that was good. She said the right person would not feel like work. She said these things with the practicality of someone who meant them, and was not just filling the silence. I said, "The thing is, I actually tried this time. I prepared. I wore the good jacket. I asked questions." She said, "You wore the good jacket?" I said I had. She said, "The navy one?" I said yes. She said, "That is the good jacket," in the tone of someone reviewing evidence and finding it credible. Then she said she missed out, and it had the particular flatness of a statement she meant without trying to make it land. I said, "You're being kind." She said, "I'm being accurate. There's a difference. I looked at her. She was looking at the television. I said, with more honesty than I usually deployed at 10:15 on a Tuesday, I don't know. Maybe I'm just not someone women find interesting when they actually get me in a room. Maybe I'm better in theory. She said, that's not true. I said, you don't know that. She said, I live with you. I said, which means you know all the boring parts. She was quiet for a moment. She pulled the blanket up slightly. Not cold. The tell I had learned by then was real, which was a very slight tightening of her fingers at the hem, not the casual adjustment. And her fingers had tightened. She said, very quietly, looking at the television, I wouldn't have turned you down. I stopped talking. The room did what rooms do when something true has been said in them without warning. It did not change at all. And it changed entirely. The television was on. The tea was on the table. The blanket was in her lap. Everything was exactly where it had been. She was not looking at me. I said, what did you just say? She said, nothing. Never mind. I said, Priya. She said, I misspoke. Forget it. I said, you didn't misspeak. She was quiet. Her fingers had not loosened from the hem of the blanket. She had the look of someone who has released a thing they cannot take back and is now calculating their options. I said, you can say never mind if you want to. I'm not going to force anything. But I don't think you misspoke, and I think you know that I know that. She said, still not looking at me, this is a very inconvenient thing to have said. I said, yeah, she said, we live together. I said, I'm aware. She said, if I've made it weird, I can walk that back. I can pretend I said something else. You can pretend you misheard me. We have a working arrangement, and I don't want to. I said, Priya. She stopped. I said, how long? She closed her eyes briefly. She said, that is an unfair question. I said, it's the only question I have right now. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, without looking at me, since around month 4. I noticed and I told myself it was proximity, that it was just what happens when you share a space with someone decent and you mistake familiarity for something else. A pause. I told myself that for about 10 months. I said, that's almost the whole time. She said, I'm aware of the timeline. Something in my chest settled into a configuration I had not recognized as available before that sentence. I said, I wore the good jacket tonight. For someone I met twice. She looked at me for the first time since she had said the thing. Her expression was difficult, layered, the way her expressions sometimes were when she was feeling more than one thing at once and had not decided which one to lead with. I said, I have worn exactly 0 good jackets for the person I have been thinking about for, I don't know, longer than I knew I was doing it. And I think that's because when something is actually real, you get careful about it in ways that look like nothing. She said, we share a bathroom. I said, I know. She said, you have seen me at my absolute worst. You saw the week of the bad client project. You saw the thing with the ceiling leak at 6 in the morning. You know which nights I need to be left alone. I said, I do. She said, that's not. Most people don't get that version. That version is usually something you protect. I said, I know. I've always known you were showing me something you don't show easily. I thought it was just trust. I think it was more than trust, and I didn't let myself know it. She looked at the blanket. She said, quietly, when you went on the date tonight, I cleaned the kitchen, which I never do in the evenings. I just needed to do something with my hands. That hit harder than I expected. I said, Priya. She looked up. I said. I don't want to have a conversation that makes tonight weird and then have to navigate the apartment for the next 6 months. So, I want to be clear. I stopped. I'm not having a vulnerable night. I'm not looking for comfort after a rejection. I've been noticing you since month 3, at least, and telling myself the same things you told yourself. And if you hadn't said what you said tonight, I think we'd have kept on telling ourselves those things for another year, and it would have been a real waste. She said, after a moment, month 3. I said, you made the disaster soup. She said, that soup was not a disaster. I said, Priya. She said, it was a partial disaster. I said, it was objectively inedible, and you knew it, and you laughed about it for 20 minutes, and that was the moment. That was when I knew something was different. She looked at me for a long time with an expression I was now cataloging from scratch, something open in it that the working hours version of her face did not usually allow. She said, the disaster soup. I said, the disaster soup. She almost smiled. The almost smile was better than most people's actual ones. She said, softly, I wouldn't have turned you down, James. I said, I know. I believe you. I moved from the armchair to the couch, to her side of it, the side with the blanket and the paperback and the ceramic bowl that held nothing, and she did not move away. She shifted slightly to make room, which was different from not moving, and I sat close enough that the gap between us was a choice rather than a default. We sat like that for a moment, without speaking. The television was still on. The food we had not ordered yet was still a future problem. The apartment was the same apartment it had always been. Same walls, same light, same configuration of furniture that we had both navigated so many times we no longer thought about it, and something inside that sameness had quietly rearranged itself. The way a room feels different after you move one thing, even if you cannot immediately identify what moved. She was looking at her hands in her lap. I could see her thinking. That particular stillness she had when she was working something out, turning it over for weak points the way she turned over a brief before she committed to a direction. I let her think. I had learned in 14 months that she arrived at things in her own time and that waiting was not the same as losing ground. She did not take my hand immediately. She looked at it for a moment. The way she looked at things she was deciding were worth it, and then she took it. And her grip was certain the way her grip on the blanket hem had been, like someone holding something they had been careful with and were done being careful about. Her phone on the table lit up. She ignored it. It lit up again. She picked it up, looked at it, and made the face she made when someone was being persistent in a way she had not budgeted for. I asked who it was. She said, my sister. She apparently has opinions about something I mentioned to her last week that she has chosen to share at 10:45 on a Tuesday. I said, what did you mention to her? She said, my roommate. She said it looking at her phone, not at me, in the tone of someone who knew exactly what they were admitting. I said, what did you tell her? She said, that my roommate wore a good jacket sometimes and it was becoming a problem. She put the phone face down. She's going to be insufferable about this. I said her sister was going to be right about it. She said that was the most annoying part. We ordered food at 11 because neither of us had eaten properly and the kitchen was too far away in spirit, if not in actual distance. We ate on her side of the couch, which was now just the couch, with the throw blanket across both of us, and she fell asleep before midnight with her head at an angle that was going to be uncomfortable in the morning, and I let her, because the evening had been long, and because some things are worth the crick in your neck. 2 months later, her sister visited and spent the entire weekend being right with an enthusiasm that we had no reasonable defense against. She had been told the disaster soup detail. She considered it the most romantic thing she had ever heard, which I think says something about the sister, and also, possibly, about the soup. 6 months in, when the lease came up for renewal, we signed it again, same apartment. Same arrangement, mostly. The coffee was still made in the mornings, the maintenance requests were still mine. The throw blanket still occupied her side of the couch. The things that had changed were quieter than the things that stayed the same, which is how it is when a life shifts rather than breaks. A year after that, when people asked how we got together, she told them I had come home from a bad date and talked myself into a corner, and she had said something she wasn't planning to say, and neither of us had been the same since. I told them she had made disaster soup in month 3 and thought she had gotten away with it. She said that was not how feelings worked. I said it was exactly how feelings worked. She said, "You're describing a soup." I said, "I'm describing the moment I knew." She never argued with that part. She just looked at me with the expression she had that was better than most people's best ones, and the argument stopped being an argument, which was usually how our arguments ended. Nothing about it had been convenient. It had just been true, and true had turned out to be enough. What would you have done if the person who knew all your worst habits said they wouldn't have turned you down, and you realized, too late and exactly on time, that you already knew why? And have you ever been so careful with something real that you almost missed it entirely? Tell me in the comments. If this one hit, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.